Hey guys, and now we move into the second section where we study what Descartes had to say in terms of his first meditation. So, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to summarize and then explore what he said about sense data. This is going to require us to name and define some key terms. Then we're going to have to derive a first principle and then begin to analyze what we call Descartes' first method. I wonder what this first principle is going to be. Then we need to understand why Descartes should argue that sense data should be doubted. So can you write these down? 1, 2, 3, and then quickly score yourself. You might actually have already thought about them, so you might be above a 0 or 1, but it's really important for you to just think about where you're at in terms of those success criteria. Okay? The next thing I want you to do is to have a look at this, right? The reason why I want you to have a look at this is because I want you to see if you can actually keep your eye on a black dot. And if you can't, well, what if I was to tell you there was no black dot? It's just basically an optical illusion where you see the black dot in your periphery. And this begs the answer to begs us to ask the question, can you actually trust your senses? What do you think about optical illusions? Just write for 3 minutes your answer to that, a small little paragraph answer. Could you do that for me? Well, I don't think you have to be rocket science to understand that our man Descartes was a rationalist. So he was going to completely reject the senses. He was going to say, remember, according to his method and the outline of his method in the last video, he said that it's not just enough for me to reject all views or beliefs that I know are patently false. I need to reject anything that has uncertainty built into it. Then I need to explore the core assumptions I've made about things and reject them, because any other assumptions on top of them will come crumbling down if they come crumbling down. Okay? So here we've got him, and look, the most important thing we need to know about him is he starts to question the senses. He really questions them as basically a foundation stone for how the world works. Can we trust them? Well, he doesn't believe that we can actually trust the senses. They're not something that can be trusted. So take a note. This is probably one of my favorite optical illusions at the moment, and I've got to basically ask you, is this moving? Most of you will probably say yes it is, but it's actually a still image. What's really going on is that the way that it's drawn and the colors that it uses, etc., are deliberately overexciting a little part of your brain which is responsible for registering movement. And because they're overly excited, they see movement when movement isn't actually there. So the image is actually staying still. It's just that the brain is being deceived because of the way the optical illusion works. Is it moving? So that's just a really good scientific example of what Descartes was trying to illustrate. Your senses can be so easily deceived, therefore they're not certain. Therefore you can't really trust any belief that is formed through the senses. Do you know where I'm coming from? Cool. Take a note. So Descartes, being Descartes, sits down and he does a bit of a thought experiment, and he says, look, what if a crazy man were to sit down and say, and think, and basically say, look, I am not half naked and crazy, right? I am a very well dressed, very well groomed man, or I'm a pumpkin. I'm one of the two. And most of us would say that is absolutely, totally insane. But we also know that he, the crazy man, we'd probably make the conclusion, well, we can't really judge what's a favourable situation for him to be in because he's crazy. So how would he know whether or not he should be a pumpkin or whether or not he should be a very well-dressed man? Okay. And then he says, well, if you look at the senses, what's to say that his observation, that's Rene Descartes' observation, isn't crazy? What's to say that he's not the madman? Okay. And if he is the madman, then how can he judge what is actually the right circumstance to be in? How can he judge what's the right circumstance for this man to be in? So basically he's saying to himself, look, I could be the crazy man who's not really seeing, well, things properly. So how do I know that he shouldn't be better off as a pumpkin or how he shouldn't be better off as a normal man? I can't do it, just like he can't do it. So maybe I am the madman as well. So how do I actually make judgments is the question that he asks. Spend some time taking a note. So sense data really shouldn't be used to make judgments or form beliefs. Okay, what's needed is a bit of self-reflection, reflecting on how the self works. Therefore, he's not going to defend at all the use of sense data. It's completely indefensible to use sense data to arrive at knowledge of the self, because the self is really the only thing we can know, because the self is the only thing that we can know without using the senses. All right. So goodbye. We're throwing it all away because the sense data is something that we can easily doubt. All right. So take a note. All right. So just remember that he could be a madman. What's to say that he's not judging the man he perceives as a madman in the wrong way? And also just remember that obviously sense data can't be used to make judgments about what is true or certain judgments. And remember, the way that we get to know the self isn't through the senses. It's through some kind of other reflection or other way of thinking. So maybe we should reject the senses and think about how we can get to know the self. Let's start reading these two paragraphs, which we are exploring, paragraph 3 and 4. Whatever I have up till now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from the senses or through the sense, either from the senses or through the senses. So it could be an idea formed after observing something through the senses. Take a note. But from time to time, I have found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us, even once. Prudent, by the way, means it's cautious. It's the right thing to do. You're being very careful, okay? So it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. Yet although the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects, which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is quite impossible, even though they are derived from the senses. For example, that I am here sitting by the fire wearing a winter dressing gown, holding this piece of paper in my hands, and so on. So we're saying here's a belief that he is here, which is formed through the senses. We get that. Again, how could it be denied that these hands or this whole body are mine? Unless perhaps I were to liken myself to a madman whose brains are so completely damaged by the persistent vapours of melancholia. He's basically saying by the persistent gases which they believe cause depression at the time. So by the persistent vapours of melancholia, that they firmly maintain that they are kings even when they're paupers. So this is what he's saying about being well dressed. Or say they are dressed in purple when they are naked. Again, well dressed. Or that their heads are made of earthenware, or that they are pumpkins, or made of glass. But such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So he's saying, look, if I had that same perspective, I'd be thought equally as mad myself. But how can I judge that? How can I know that with my senses? So that's basically what he said. I'd like you to go back to looking at this APK. We've named and defined key terms. We've derived a first principle. And that, if you didn't know what that first principle is, it's that we cannot trust sense data. And then we need to understand why Descartes argued that sense data can be doubted, but it's easily fallible. There are optical illusions. And we can also not just deny what we sense, but deny other ideas that we've arrived at through that. So basically where he says, but such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So he's saying, if I take the thought processes of a madman and I use them as a model for how I could think, well, then I would be nuts. You know what I mean? I can't make any judgments. And I guess that's what I really meant here when I was talking about judgment, making judgments about what is real. Okay, so the madman, it's not judge what is favorably. I should really change that. He just can't make judgments, proper judgments, because he's insane. Which means too, though, if we think about what made him insane, it's his basically deranged way of perceiving the world. So the senses can be called into doubt. And if I, in turn, try and use my senses to understand the world, well, I could be a madman too. How do I know I'm not a madman? And that's why he's saying that such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad, or I'd be thought insane, if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So if I use the same thinking processes, which is basically trust in sense data that a madman uses, well, who's to say I'm not insane? I could be thought of mad if I use my senses to make judgments about what is true. And that's why we reject sense data. We reject what we sense and ideas formed through it. Cheers.